Funding for Inner Compass is provided by Calvin College.
The life that's unfolding,
the world that awaits,
gifts that are yours to explore,
and God's to use.
It's all happening here at Calvin.
Welcome to Inner Compass. I'm Shirley Hoogstra. All of us who have experienced marriage know how hard it can be. On the other hand, we would like to have marriage be easier. We would like to have commitment go up. Our guest today is going to help us understand how to do that and how to endure the suffering of marriage a little bit better. Join us on Inner Compass.
From the campus of Calvin College, this is Inner Compass, exploring how people use faith and ethics to guide them through critical issues of today.
My guest today is David Gushee, professor of Christian ethics at Mercer University in Atlanta. He is also an ordained minister and author. And today we are focusing on his book titled Getting Marriage Right, Realistic Counsel for Saving and Strengthening Relationships. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Shirley. Good to be with you.
So, hot topic in today's world. Lots of people are married, and not everybody is having nirvana, as they say in marriage.
I would say that's very fair. This actually wasn't the title that I wanted for the book.
What was the title?
And it actually kind of reflects the spirit of the book a little bit more. My title was Marriage, a Guide for the Perplexed.
I love that.
And you don't actually get to pick your title most of the time with publishers, but I actually wanted to communicate that marriage today is perplexing.
Right.
It's confusing. It's harder than it should be. Their marriage is falling apart all around us.
Well, we see the high divorce stats.
Right.
And yet, if you asked 8 out of 10 people on the street, would you like to be in a happy marriage? People would probably say yes.
Except for those who've given up on even hope of that.
Wow.
But most people have not. They still are hoping for that.
So what causes people to be perplexed about marriage today?
Well, I think people are confused about why it's so hard. Maybe they look back on a grandparents' or great-grandparents' generation where a divorce was unthinkable, and now it seems that everybody's been divorced a couple times. That's part of it. It's like a generational change. And people going into marriage with all kinds of hopes and expectations find so often that it just doesn't work.
There's no longer any stigma, or less stigma, certainly.
I'd say no stigma.
Okay.
You feel sorry for people. You know it's a rough time, but it's just kind of part of life. I think as Christians we need to do better than that. But.
And you talk in your book about the 8 relationship levels, and I wanted to just talk about that because, when you get married, you think level number 1, ecstatic union. And then you hope for an intimate partnership. And maybe on days it's a cordial friendship, but the friendship piece is really important. Peaceful coexistence, boy, that's getting into neutral.
Right.
And then tense silence. Anybody who's married perhaps has experienced tense silence. I'm not talking, you're not talking, who's going to break that, right?
Right.
Well, then you got active hostility, full-scale belligerence, and then the irreconcilable brokenness. How'd you come up with these?
This list actually was from journaling, personal journaling that I did in a time of real struggle in my own marriage. And I think it pretty accurately, journaling sometimes is the truest writing that you could do. But it reflected what I was going through, and it reflects what a lot of people go through.
Now, when you say what you were going through, is that in a period of 10 years or 3 months or 1 week?
One of the things that motivated the writing of this book and affected the way it was written was some struggles that my wife and I were having related to an adoption. We adopted somebody, it's a long story, but basically it created a lot of dynamics in our relationship that were very painful.
And so this was an older child.
Yeah, this was actually an adult child who needed a family, and we did the right thing. We provided a family for her, but it unleashed some dynamics that we hadn't anticipated. So that period lasted about a year.
Okay, and so here you were, sometimes when we think we do the right thing, we also expect sort of a yellow brick road then experience because, look, you're doing a hard thing. Yeah. You're doing an admirable thing, and then you get this unintended fallout, it sounds like, in your marriage.
Yeah.
Did you anticipate it at all?
No, did not anticipate it at all. This was a student who needed a family after a real bad situation of abuse, so we took her in, And we did it because we knew it was the right thing to do. I had no idea that it would cause such tensions. I mean, you bring a dysfunctional person into your home,
Right.
and then you change the dynamics of the family, and that's what happened for us. But it was tough. It was a tough year.
You talk about external circumstances because it could be a loss of a job,
Right.
right? It could be a death of a child.
Right.
So what do people do to prepare for that?
Well, I think that a basic theme for me is that we need to be more realistic in our expectations of marriage. Marriage can be the most wonderful thing in the world, but because human beings are sinners and because our relationships are never flawless, sometimes there are really, really hard times in marriage. And our marriage books and our ministers who prepare people for marriage need to say that so that we're not so surprised.
So to young couples, right? Or even actually before people are even dating, you could say, all right, when you date, let's have a realistic understanding, because then you might pick a person who's actually good at sticking with something or persevering or conflict resolution instead of just what they look like or how much chemistry there is or what their future looks like in terms of economic benefit. They might look at some other personality qualities.
Yeah, I say in the book that character is far more important than, say, personality or temperament or certainly attractiveness or any of the other things. And you want somebody who has the character qualities that are necessary in life. And one of them is endurance, another is patience, and another is forgiveness and things like that. And that people need to be thinking about from when they begin dating.
When my mother was alive and we would talk as a young woman who was dating, my mother said to me, Shirley, the most important thing you can do is marry someone who's kind. And at the time, I sort of understood that, but now after being married 30 years, I really understand that. Because when you marry someone who's kind, and I have a kind husband, it doesn't mean that you won't have difficulties, but when you have them, you might not have the tongue lashings that can come. Or you might have someone who actually values forgiveness because they will extend that kindness to you, and they might overlook your faults, which are numerous for me, in a very kind way. And it's a trade-off though. I mean, if you go with maybe kind, I mean, you don't get everything.
Right, maybe you don't. I think you could get a whole lot worse advice than marry somebody who's
Isn't
kind.
that a great? And then she said marry someone who's a Christian because she knew that would be a lot of common values.
Right.
I wish she had said, because I think this is a really nice quality, and it's someone with a sense of humor.
Yeah.
I think humor can go a long way in marriage.
It's just the basic things are the most important. I think what you discover is that the high passions of being 20 years old, they're valuable. They help in a lot of ways, and they're a lot of fun. But it's who you are when you're 50,
right?
And 60 and 40. The solid core of the person needs to be what the kind of person that you want.
You write in your book that you and your wife Jeannie are happy.
Extremely, yeah.
Yeah, and I would have to say, after 30 years, when we were just on vacation, my husband and I and with our families, and we were early one morning saying, we're happier today at 30 years of marriage than we were at 15. And we were sort of reflecting back on why that was. There is a sense, I'm going to say this, it's a good sense, but it's this necessary loss. You go into marriage with these this unrealistic expectation that somehow you're going to meet on every point, or really be able to mold the other person to this person you want them to be.
Bad idea. Yeah. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Right? It's a bad idea.
It is. Everybody has it, it seems like.
Right. But then at some point you say, and actually this was advice that we got from a very wise friend, why don't you concentrate on the things that your spouse has that you really like, and just put in a box the things aren't going to happen. And just realize, I think it was Judith Viorst who coined the phrase, all of us have necessary losses. Name it and get over it.
I think that is very good advice. Because nobody is perfect, and because our relationships get kind of scrapes and dents as we go through life, those who are in quest of the perfect person or the perfect relationship will spend their whole life looking.
So what do you think are the biggest misconceptions that young people have as they're going into marriage?
I think that One of them is this whole idea that you're going to find a soulmate with whom you...
No soulmate?
I'm not a soulmate person. I mean, to me, I actually critique the concept pretty intensely in the book.
I'm not a soulmate person either.
It's actually a pagan notion. It comes from ancient philosophy. Really, the Christian understanding of marriage is you be the right person spiritually and morally, and you hope to marry somebody who has those core qualities, and then you learn to live together.
Right, right. So this expectation that this soulmate, right? It's like, we'll know your very core. We'll be able to anticipate your every need, right? We'll send you the flowers or give you the background without even asking, right?
You don't even need to talk anymore. It's all mental telepathy, because you're just so close.
Right.
And there are moments like that. And maybe a way to say it is sometimes the things that happen in the most joyful and transcendent moments, people expect as a daily experience.
Right.
And it just doesn't work that way.
Jerry Sitzer talks about your vocation as doing the normal, ordinary things of life faithfully. Yeah. And so just what you were saying. It's your 15 minutes of fame or the high transcendent moments are not going to be the ordinary, normal existence necessarily.
I think that people just don't get that. I also another expectation issue has to do with sex. I think that people, especially Christians who have waited for marriage,
right,
then without any kind of serious preparation, they don't even read anything necessarily, or
right,
nobody's really talked to them, all of a sudden it's going to be a transcendent experience there too.
Right.
And that needs to be dealt with as well.
Well, that can be a huge disappointment for a young couple.
I think so.
And especially for Christian young couples, when we say to them, rightfully so, biblically so, we'd like you to wait. And we'd like you to do that body exploration in the kind of way you can do in marriage when you're married. Yeah. So therefore, when you get married, it actually is a process, a journey, an exploration that is not necessarily even your first 6 months, your first 7, 9, 8, a year.
Right. But I think in general, we load up too many expectations on marriage. This person will complete me. This person will make me happy.
Right.
This person will always be there for me.
Right.
And we are blessed if we have that happen a lot of times.
Right.
But we need, I think our faith helps us to understand that only God is the perfect friend, and only God is there always.
Right.
And and my relationship with God, nothing can substitute for that.
So in essence, a marriage that has a strong core and is able to withstand difficulties or suffering would be perhaps a marriage in which the individuals are concentrating and nurturing their relationship with God.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And one of the things that I think we are responsible for each other, Jeannie and I look at it this way, I help to make sure that she's taking care of her spiritual life, and she helps to make sure that I'm taking care of my spiritual life, because that core, that quiet core that comes from, I am in relationship with God, I am reading the Bible, I am in worship, I am reflecting on my life and trying to live right, I'm in community, Christian community. All of that is indispensable, I think. I think a lot of people, their marriages fly apart because their selves fly apart. Their character flies apart. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they believe. Their values get shaky. And a marriage cannot endure much of that.
Right. We talk here about, to students and to ourselves hopefully, that our primary identity is in Jesus Christ.
Right.
So that your primary identity is not as a spouse, or as a friend necessarily. And for single people, when your primary identity is in Jesus Christ and not as a married person, or right, in marriage, or as a mate, that actually helps you to be a better single person. It helps you to be a better married person.
It also helps to level out some of the distinctions that we sometimes create. Here's the married class and here's right, the singles class. Fundamentally, we are all in the same community in Christ. People striving to conform to the image of Christ, to find our identity in Christ and to live for Him. And that is more important than any other distinction that there might be about us.
You talk in your book about covenant, and let me just read something.
Sure.
I thought it was a wonderful number of sentences, and I'd like to think about it together. You talk about marriage having a paradigm of covenant. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit first about what is your understanding of this covenant paradigm?
Yeah, a covenant is basically an exchange of sacred promises.
and God is watching over those
God
promises.
is watching over. In fact, the promises are to God as well as to each other. And in a public wedding, as all weddings I think should be, the promises are to the community that is gathered also.
So if you're at one of those marriage ceremonies where they say, and now congregation, do you, and we all say, we will, God helping us, or something similar, we better watch out for that, because that's a promise we've made.
Right. I understand the wedding ceremony to communicate multiple responsibilities, and one of them is the congregation for the couple, but the couple is also promising the church and the community as a whole that they will keep these promises. One reason is because how well they keep these promises affects everybody in the community.
Yes. And so you talk here about covenant takes faithless people and forces them to keep faith. Covenant says, I will be sexually faithful even when my needs for sex are frustrated in my marriage. I will be emotionally and sexually faithful even when my companionship needs are frustrated. I will be faithful in my parental responsibilities even when I am bone weary of both you and the children. And I will be faithful in my communication and forgiveness even when I never want to speak to you again because you have wounded me deeply. I will be faithful in sharing the work responsibilities of family life. Amen, amen. Even when I can barely put one foot in front of the other. Lastly, I will be faithful in sharing a home and a bed with you even when I want to flee. The want to flee part, because you write in the book that people will try to resolve pain.
Mm-hmm.
And my life before Calvin College, I was a matrimonial lawyer. And without a doubt, every couple who came in to see me, or every individual, was in a relationship of deep pain.
Right.
It wasn't flippant. People were not just willy-nilly getting divorced. That's a myth. People thought hard and long about it.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, sometimes I, as a divorce lawyer, was the first person they had talked to about their deep pain, which
Wow.
was, we then sent them on for some counseling and so on.
Yeah.
But deep pain, and you write here, people flee.
Because, I mean, it is the most instinctive thing in the world. We do not want to suffer for lengthy periods of time, and the higher the pain level, the more we are looking for some relief.
What are then the adequate, acceptable, a better choice than fleeing? What do we do? I mean, you've talked about something that's real here in this paragraph.
Well, what I was trying to say there is covenant does not mean I put up with just anything indefinitely.
Okay, that's good to know.
Right. I argue that there are breaches of the covenant. It's a two-way relationship. And if somebody breaches their covenant with us in some kind of fundamental way that cannot be repaired, then sometimes divorce is the only way to resolve that breach. But most people, or many people, get divorced for problems and for pains and sufferings, you might say, that are not to that level. It's a rough period. It's a rough season. There's an issue that just hasn't been resolved. There are patterns that just need to be worked on.
How do you do that? If you're in this as a couple, I would guess that there's some recommendation of community.
I think that sometimes couples reach the end of what they can do on their own.
Right.
You're just in like a chess game, and you get to a certain point on the board and you just can't move anymore.
Right.
We need community. We need friends. Sometimes friends can help. We need counselors. We need the church. We might need serious therapy, or maybe we just need a marriage enrichment class, in a church that can say, oh yeah, and you're in community with others, and they say, oh, the way we dealt with that was this, and it's a whole new horizon.
Right.
You never thought of it before. I think what's so sad, especially where there are children involved, because their lives are so fragile and so contingent on what their parents do, is when a solvable problem that is causing pain in the short term becomes the grounds for divorce. And then everybody's lives are thrown upside down for something that really did not need to go that way.
Did you speak with children of divorce when you were writing this book?
And many of them. I have a whole chapter in the book from interviews of children of divorce, and their stories are heartbreaking.
I think you write, you can't actually dissolve a marriage if you have children, because you can't dissolve the children.
Right, which is terribly inconvenient many times. In fact, I remember when we lived in Tennessee, there was a case where, and this happens a lot, maybe not always this extreme, where a guy murdered his children.
Right.
Because he thought in his own head, they can't be happy without their mom and me together. So I'm doing a favor for them. I'm going to kill them.
Right.
Oh, obviously, the guy was either evil or insane or both, and is on death row now in Tennessee.
Right.
But children are very vulnerable to the fact that, hey, that marriage is over, but they're still here.
Right.
What are you still doing here? I mean, children are the one flesh embodiment of a former relationship, of the current relationship or the former relationship. And when they are the embodiment of a relationship that everybody kind of wishes had never happened, then they're in a actually very vulnerable and terrible place.
What does the church do or not do in order to make marriage work, get marriage right?
I spend a lot of time in the book talking about that, and I think that I'll just start at the most practical level.
Right.
Every minister who does a wedding in a church should either do significant premarital preparation or be sure that the couple has had it.
Okay, before they marry, make sure that happens.
Testing, there's a great test called the Prepare test. There are others, but premarital testing and conversation with the freedom of the minister to say, you're not ready.
Okay. So then the minister has to kind of know the couple, don't
The
they?
minister has to know each couple that they marry.
Right.
No just kind of going down, hey, Rev, will you do the wedding for
Right.
us? How much will you pay me? We are not justices of the peace. We are ministers of the gospel. Mm-hmm. And so you either do the counseling or you be sure that they do the counseling, and you have the right to refuse.
Okay.
That's one thing. 75% of all weddings are performed in churches. But if you ask what percentage of those was there significant premarital preparation, it's growing, but it's still, I'd say, it'd be less than half.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
That's
what
one
about
thing.
what about the young couples? So they've gotten married, they're in a church, and actually they're shell-shocked. This was not what it was supposed to be. What did I do? I got to get out. I got to cut my losses.
Cut my losses. You have this category called starter marriage.
Yes.
For people who give up shortly after a couple of years.
Right.
And sometimes they married unwisely, and sometimes it's a justifiable choice, but a lot of times it's just adjustment pains.
Right.
You need, a lot of churches will have newly married kind of classes, and that's okay, but I think it would be good if you had skilled leadership with people who know the literature about adjustment to marriage and can actually guide people through, okay, now that we're doing marriage, let's talk again about things like finances and sexuality and communication and things like that. Ongoing kind of tutorial.
I remember my husband and I were married for a year, and we were attending a church in New Jersey, and Reverend Hoogstra said, we're going to have a marriage class. And he and anybody could come, and what I considered the saintly older couple came, Ben and Roberta. They, to me, she had medical problems, he had some challenges. They just seemed so in sync, they seemed so committed to each other, even keel. Yeah. And we were sitting around, and the minister actually led us in such a safe way that people were willing to tell stories and to tell their experiences. Well, Ben and Roberta told a story about when they were newly married. Roberta got so sick of Ben's underwear laying on the floor that she threw it over every chandelier that they had. And this is in old New Jersey where you have the hanging lights. And she just threw all of his clothes that had been left on the floor on every hanging light fixture, which at that time a guest from their church knocked on the door unexpectedly. And she also turned over all the furniture. And
she was pretty frustrated.
She was. And she was trying to get a message there to Ben. Someone knocks on the door, a member of their church. She opens the door. Ben turned over one chair for the visitor, turned over one chair for Roberta and himself, and they had a little conversation with things hanging. The great thing about that story was I looked at Ben and Roberta as a newly married woman, and I said, wow, there are going to be seasons, ups and downs, skirmishes, and it's okay, because look at the end result.
Too few people in our culture get to enjoy that mellow last stage of life where you've got the kinks pretty much worked out.
Right, persevere.
And you persevere through it, and you really ride off into the sunset together.
There is a group of people in the church or in our communities or our friendships that are not really well enough to marry. They just are fragile in some ways.
Yeah.
Could be a lot of ways. How does the church incorporate that kind of individual, brother and sister?
I think a lot of people who are not well enough to marry do get married, partly because we don't really present another alternative.
Right.
Adult life means getting married. And not everybody, the Bible clearly says not everybody is called to get married. Some are called to be single, and some are not healthy enough to be married.
Right.
So I think that we need to create a sense of family in our churches. Everybody has a place around the table.
Right.
Married couples are not privileged over single people. Children are just as welcome as our 80-year-olds.
Right, right. So intergenerational.
It's intergenerational, and it's not dependent on marital status.
Don't you think if you have a healthy marriage that it equips you to actually reach out and now you guys did that ultimately successfully.
Ultimately successfully.
A healthy marriage incorporated this adult person as an adoptee,
right.
even with difficulties.
Yeah. Marriage is a base of operations for doing good things in the world. That's the way I think about it. And I have a chapter on marriage as a platform for the kingdom of God. And so yeah, marriage ought to be sturdy enough to be a base of operations to do things like that, to incorporate people, to have them in and out of your home. And a lot of times, this has happened with us, teenagers will bring lots of strays your way, right? You know, because if your home is stable and loving, then it becomes a magnet for kids. And man, that's great when that happens.
Thank you, David.
You're very welcome.
My guest today has been David Gushee, professor of Christian ethics at Mercer University in Atlanta, and author of Getting Marriage Right, Realistic Counsel for Saving and Strengthening Relationships. I'm Shirley Hoogstra, and thank you for watching Inner Compass.